This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze, our journey through life. And you're going to meet my guest in a couple of minutes, and you're going to find out that we can plan our life as much as we want. But you know what? There are challenges out there, obstacles that we think we can't get around. But most of us really can if we want to. We may not end up in the spot where we thought we were going to end up, because I'm surely not where I thought I was going to end up. But you know what? I find sunshine in every day. So my guest today is Marsha, and I'm going to let her pronounce her own last name, because if you're watching this on Zoom, you see it spelled out and you're probably saying, Karen, that's probably a good idea. So Marsha, welcome to Avoid the Maze.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen. And I appreciate being here. I love your message and I love the whole concept of avoiding the maze. I love it. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about your journey, because when I read your bio, and I have it out here, um, it says that you went through a lot, and some of the things that you went through, um, I'm sure you didn't plan as a young child. I mean, substance abuse, who plans that? Um, and we all think that when we've hit bottom, that's the lowest we can get. But sometimes even that goes down deeper. So give us a little history.
Yeah, exactly. Everything that you've just said there. Before I go in, I do want to say that if there's one thing there's so many things I've learned, but we all have different bottoms. And we can't look at somebody else's bottom and think, why are they not at bottom yet? Because we all have different bottoms. We all have different ideas of what we want for our life. And that was something that took me a long time to learn. So my name is Marsha Vanwynsberghe. I am a NLP trainer. I am fascinated by stories and helping people to overcome, speak, share, write vulnerable stories, for the main reason that I know what it's like to feel alone. That's really what the fuel is behind everything that I do, is this piece that I know what it's like to feel alone in your story and feel like you're the only person in the world who is struggling. And it's never true. It's never true. The reason it feels true is because we don't like to talk about the difficult things in life. It's really that simple. We just like to keep our struggles to ourselves. And I am sharing that so many beautiful things can open up in our world when we learn how to, even if you're listening to this thinking, I can't sit on a podcast and share my story. That's crazy. You don't have to, but if your story holds you back from being who you're meant to be, living the life you're meant to live, it still has a hold on you. And so I think that's a really powerful piece. I was a parent about 12 years ago. We started to experience teen substance abuse. And you're right, never in my wildest dreams. I didn't ask for it. This is not what I signed up for. It's not what I wanted, yet it's what we had. And no matter what we did, it was still what we had. We tried everything we could think of doing. And through a tremendous amount of work and support and, counseling programs and parent programs, and starting to learn that what could I control? And really what I could control was me. And that is a really tough lesson for a parent and a mom, because I like to say that for some reason, we have signed this invisible contract somewhere stating that we are 100% responsible for every single thing that happens in our house, our kids, our spouse, we manage it all. So many women I know are doing that. And when things aren't going according to plan, we make that our fault.
Right.
Like we are supposed to fix that. And the more we do that with the guilt, the shame, the heaviness that we put back on ourselves, the harder we're making it for ourselves to navigate a really difficult situation. So I had to learn a lot of those lessons the hard way. And in the process, don't ask me why. There's no logical reason. There really isn't, except that I remember saying to my counselor that day, I am so sick and tired of nobody wanting to talk about the difficult things in life. And because of that, we felt so alone. And she looked at me and she said, maybe you're supposed to. And I just remember thinking, that's ridiculous. And what if it's not? And all of a sudden, it just turned on a light of possibility. It really didn't make logical sense to stand up in 2014, 10 years ago, and share a difficult story and what we were walking through while we were still walking through it and trying to find a way to do it. But I can tell you, it was probably the thing that saved me. It really was, because it helped me to realize that we weren't alone. There were a lot of people going through it. It helped me to connect with people who were experiencing not even the same story, but the same emotions and same feelings. And it helped me to connect to them, and it helped me to heal when I didn't realize that was going to be a byproduct of the work that I was doing. And that's led to everything that I get to do today, is from some of those very first times of sharing my story.
You know, it's interesting that you say this because my son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum when he was 6 years old. One day he was absolutely normal. The next day he was autistic. And his dad and I were terrible parents because we waited 6 years to figure this out. He's very high functioning. So if it hadn't been for a teacher who said, I think there's something a little off here, he never would have probably gotten the diagnosis. But it took me almost 10 years where I finally, like you said, am I the only one going through this? And when I talked to other parents who had children on the spectrum, but were not functioning like Alex, they didn't want any part of me because I didn't fit the mold. And so I came out and talked about it. And I would say for the first 10 years, it felt like it was the worst thing I could ever do because people were looking at me, asking me why I was telling my story. And then all of a sudden, one day, somebody came up to me and said, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm hurting the same way you are. And then somebody else asked me, so you don't love your son, right? And I said, oh, no, that has nothing to do with it. I don't like what he's going through and how it's affecting me. But no, I love my son. And that was another pivotal point where I finally said, this is what I got to do the rest of my life. I've got to talk about the things that make me me. And if it helps nobody else, maybe it's helping me. Maybe that's my therapy. And it sounds like that's sort of what you saw too.
It is 100% what I saw too. It's 100%. And I feel that I mean, thank you for sharing that, because I can relate on so many levels. My one son is definitely on the high functioning spectrum, but he didn't fit into school. And that was where school became an absolute nightmare. Now he's doing incredibly well, and because he's brilliant. He just didn't fit in the school mold. But we spent our lives advocating for him. And during this time, I think one of the things that really clicked for me was that we didn't look like what people thought families who struggle with this look like.
Yeah.
And because of that, I actually felt even more called to share, because I wanted, if we're going to change a stigma, we're going to change a story, then it's even more important that I don't fit the mold that people want it to be. And the reason people want that mold, or that they want to attach a meaning to it, that like, you don't love your kids because you're sharing this story. If I've shared my story on over 1,000 podcasts, I have done this like for a decade. I don't share a ton of details about them. I share it about myself and my journey through it, because I do believe it's very important to keep others in integrity, 100%. But sharing the journey as a parent, it opened up doors for me to, like I said, to build connections and to help myself to heal. But it actually opened up what I think is actually my purpose of what I'm here to do and the work that I'm here to do. So I always say, do I wish I could have learned these lessons another way? 10,000%. I wish I would have. I wish I could have. I wish I could have opened up a book and figured it out. But that's not how it works. You have to live certain lessons in order to be able to really embody the lessons that you've learned, to share them. They don't come from just reading it in a book.
And it's interesting as you tell your story, and I'm sure this has happened on other podcasts you've been in. There's something about what you went through that resonates to me. And that's what I want our listeners to understand is I have not walked in your shoes,
No.
but so many of these things are parallel. We understand, and unless you start talking about it, again, you think you are all alone, the only person who just can't move forward.
Mhm.
But if you want to live your life and you want your family to be happy, you have to take those steps forward. And sometimes those steps forward are difficult.
They're very difficult. And I still get that question in the sense that people will say to me, like, but how did you do it? It had to be so scary. And yes, and it was scarier to do nothing. It was scarier to stay where I was. It was scarier to be in that space because I felt like I was in a pile of quicksand and I was going down. That's what life felt like. Is like, if I don't do something, I might not be here to watch it anymore because I actually didn't want to watch it. I needed to find a different purpose for what we were walking through. But based on what you just said there, Karen, that's really important is that, I mean, for the number of people and clients and humans that I have connected with, only a small percentage have my story. They connect and relate, like we connect and relate to human experience, to emotions that we're walking through,
Right.
the lessons that we're learning. So when people say, I'm scared to share that part of my story, well, you don't need the details of your story. But when you can learn how to be vulnerable and share who you are, what you've experienced, like what you've learned as a result, what you're doing, and you can actually put something good back into the world, you will connect with all kinds of people and stories. Like I definitely attract a lot of heavier stories. I do a lot of heavier stories in my space, and I love it. I absolutely love it because I feel like it's like creating freedom for people that they did not have before, and that's worth it.
Exactly. Well, in 2003, I felt like I was hitting rock bottom.
Mhm.
My son was 13 years old. Our relationship appeared to be rocky. I didn't understand everything he was going through, but yet I was defending it all. So
Mhm.
I wrote a letter to the Dr. Phil show begging for help. And I got answered and they brought us on.
Oh my gosh.
I will say the only good thing that came from it is that my husband, my son, and I were so vulnerable that when we came home, number one, a lot of people didn't like us anymore,
Mhm.
but we started to see the realization. We saw that what opening up did, and it helped the three of us.
Good.
We saw the films that they took of us with their hidden camera in our apartment, and we didn't like what we saw, but we had to see it.
Mhm.
And I remember my father said to me, "Why did you do this?" And I said, "Because I had to come clean. I had to say to myself, there's got to be a better way." And, I don't think you have to go on a Dr. Phil show to do this, but that was our beginning. And it was the beginning for my son to say, I'm not going to let anybody discount me evermore.
Mm.
I'm going to do what I need to do to become the person I want to be. And he
Mhm.
has.
It's
He
beautiful.
lives 1,000 miles away. He has a great, future with the company he's working for. He's happy. He misses his mom. And
Mhm.
that makes me happy because I will tell you, when he was 13 years old, I really thought he hated me.
Mhm.
So again, as we hear these stories, there's somebody out there that says, oh, yeah, I know what that means. But they
Yeah.
don't have to have a son on the autism spectrum to understand it.
No.
So when did you start seeing yourself sort of change, not feeling as if maybe you were the victim?
Well, that's a great question because in the beginning, I was great at seeing myself as a victim. I was really good. Like I had pulled up, bought property, and lived in that area because that's what I felt on all senses. And I think it's normal to have that time period of feeling like a victim. The challenge is when we try and live there full time and create change in our life, you can't do both. You have to decide to leave that space because there comes a point where I kept asking why. Like, why is this happening to us? Like, what did we do wrong? Why is this happening to us? And the challenge is like, what answer could I have been given that would have made it better? Because we still had this, we still had the problems. And I had to really recognize that the why was actually killing me. And so through that process, I started to, my first couple times sharing was in schools and on very small stages. And I shared to a school board and a set of parents. And I was very open with the schools and what was happening. I was very open. And they used us in a beautiful way because they're like, we don't know what to say to parents. And this is like great. So that's really how it started. It was very organic and very easy. And through the process, it kind of took a life of its own. Like it ended up getting onto a radio station, then a live radio show, and then a TV, then so kind of not like yours, Dr. Phil, although I did write Dr. Phil, but we did, it kind of grew organically. And I wrote a collaborative chapter. And in the process of writing, I felt like, oh, that felt interesting. Like that felt good to put my thoughts down. And I wrote 2 more collaborative books and then continued to talk. And then I had a moment where it was like, I think I'm supposed to write a book. And I remember that being super, super clear that it's, yeah, I need to write a book. And I told my husband, he's like, are you sure? Because this is like, that's vulnerable. And I said, yeah, I think I'm supposed to. And I always say that when you have a download that you're supposed to do something, be very mindful who you share that with. He was very supportive of me. Extended family, when I first announced it, thought I'd lost my mind. They're like, you absolutely lost your mind. But we come from the generation, I say we, but from the generation of, we don't talk about difficult things. We don't share them. We don't tell anyone we're struggling. We don't tell anyone we're suffering. And we put a smile on and you just move on. That's what you do. And so when I first announced it, it was very much like thought I had lost my mind. But I also believe the reason that we were in this space of feeling like we were the only people in the world who were struggling is because of that mindset. I feel like that's the mindset that has to change.
Right.
And whenever you're a person who is creating change, you're going to be met with a lot of different resistance because people don't like that change. And so it's very important that you keep coming back and anchoring to what's important to you. When I feel overwhelmed with big decisions in my life, I often tap back into that version of me in 2016 that felt like it's time to write my book, even though nobody thinks it's a good idea. Don't know why I did. I really don't. I wish I had a clearer understanding, but I did. And I know that that was the path for the work of everything that I'm doing today. And through that process, when you talk about shifting from victimhood outward, I decided to name my book When She Stopped Asking Why, because the why was killing me. It was absolutely killing me. I remember my publisher saying that title is too complicated, too long, no one's going to get it. And I said, I actually disagree. I think that people who have walked through anything difficult will understand it. And that was the big turning point in my life is I had to stop asking why. Why is great when you're moving towards a goal? Why is not great when you're trying to figure out why are you suffering? And why are you struggling? Because there is no answer. So for me, it was every time I thought of the question why, or I would ask myself, it would be, no, it's not the why, it's what matters. Like, what am I doing? Because what is an action word and what will move us and shift us? And that's really what helped me to shift out of victim mode into the space of writing.
I love that. And that question why is a form of grief. We are grieving over what is happening around us and that we think we have no control over. Now, we may not be able to change an individual. I wasn't going to change my son, but
Yeah.
I had to change my interactions. I had to change what I was feeling deep inside, but I had to understand it.
Mhm.
And it took me a long time, many, many years, probably a good 10 years from the time I started to finally say, I don't have to ask why anymore.
Mhm.
Okay. If there's that feeling, I have to recognize it. What is it doing to me?
Mhm.
And I know there are people out there who are going, yeah, but if you don't know why, you're going to repeat it. No, if you understand where it's coming from, what it's doing to you, those are the things you can fix. If my
Mhm.
finger is cut and bleeding, if I clean
Mhm.
it off, put antiseptic on it and a Band-Aid, it's
Mhm.
going to heal.
Mhm.
Now I got to find out what's hurting
Mhm.
and find a way to get that fixed. And I might make mistakes along the way. I could make it
You
worse.
will. We
Yep.
all do. Yep.
But I grew up in a generation where you weren't supposed to make a mistake. Okay.
Yep. Mhm.
And if you're still stuck in that time capsule, it's like, well, who can I talk to? And you're very lucky that your spouse was that support system, that you could take something to, that he wouldn't say, hey, you're crazy. It'd be like, okay, do it. My husband did the same thing. And to this day, I sort of wonder. In fact, yesterday I was saying to him, I'm not so sure how much longer I want to do this. And he goes, really? It was like, okay, who's getting who now?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think this journey is for everyone. Like it is interesting because people say to me all the time, like, I resonate with your story, I connect with it, but I don't see myself speaking on a stage. I'm like, you don't have to. It's not for everyone. It isn't. And there's no pressure in that. But I really do believe that if your story is holding you back from living the life that you're meant to live, showing up in the authentic way that you're meant to show up, experiencing the things that you're meant to experience, it has a hold on you. And if it has a hold on you, it's controlling you. And so we hold so much shame in our own bodies. And when we feel that we have stories that we can't share, we can't show up authentically, that's shame taking the wheel. And when shame takes the wheel, our voice diminishes. And the more our voice diminishes, the more shame lives. And it's this interesting circle that happens. And people say, I just want to feel free of this. I'm like, the only person who's going to free you is you. That's it. There's no one coming to do that. You have to find a way to use your voice in your way to free yourself from carrying the shame. Nobody is shoving shame into your body, into your backpack to carry it around. You're doing that to yourself. So there's ways of learning how not to do that. That's not criticism. I'm just being very real. I'm a very real person. That is what happens. Shame is something that when we realize we are the ones that are carrying it, it can feel defeating. Like, I'm doing this to myself. It's not meant in that way. When we realize that we are the ones that are doing it, we are also the ones who can change what we're doing. We are the ones. We actually have way more power than we think that we do. And that is what it's meant to do. So understanding that relationship with shame and what we were doing to ourselves, I feel like that's probably one of my biggest missions here, is to share the stories and release the shame that we're all holding on to.
A little over 2 years ago, I took a training called positive intelligence. And what positive intelligence taught me was that one of my biggest enemies was judgment. It wasn't the judgment of others. It was myself judging and myself saying the things I couldn't do, or you shouldn't have said that, constantly. And during this 6-week session, it took me a couple of weeks before I finally opened up in the group and I said, well, I do that all the time. And I'm a pleaser. So I'm always trying to please people, but then I'm judging myself. Did I do too much? Didn't I do enough? And over. And I finally learned with this group of women that I went through this program with, I wasn't alone. We all have those voices in our head. So if anybody says there are no voices in your head, they're wrong, because there are. And I learned certain exercises and tools that now when I hear that judgment, is that a criticism, or does that mean that maybe I should look at it differently? Let's listen to that again. And if it's just telling me that I'm a bad person, well, am I really? Maybe I have done something bad. So now I can take that inner look into myself. And so there's so much out there, but you're right. You can read a book and you might just say, oh yeah, sounds good. I find when I read a lot of self-help books, I'll be honest with you, I start reading something, oh, I already know that. And I'll keep flipping through. Not that your book isn't meaningful, but the words that you use, what people are hearing you say, makes more of an impact.
I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. It's that when I wrote my book, it feels really simple. And that's because it is. It is very simple. when I wrote it, what I wanted was, I envisioned, right? Like, I think we're always qualified to help the person that we once were. All of us, we're all qualified to help the persons that we once were. And I pictured, what was it like in those moments when things were beyond traumatic and stressful and heightened. I wasn't sitting down and reading a 400-page book. I couldn't even have the brain capacity to read a page. And so I wanted it to be very simple, right? Very simple. And I mean, I work with clients now. This is not a dig in therapy by any means whatsoever, but I work with clients who are also working in therapy, who are being given these big, massive books to read. And they're in such an overwhelmed, heightened state that they're like, well, I don't even know where to, like, I can't make sense of this. And so the reason I say that is because the changes that led me this to where I am today, they were the smallest changes that if I would have looked back, I would have had no idea they would add up to what I am, where I am now, which is still, I'm always a work in progress. But those small changes, checking your language, understanding what you're saying, what am I focusing on? Where's my energy? How am I fueling myself? How am I taking care of myself? What are my boundaries? They are really simple concepts, but it's the simple things that really add up. And when you learn how to do those things, you give yourself, like, you fill your cup back up. And as you fill that cup to overflow, we feed others from the overflow, not from the cup. You now give yourself a fighting chance. And if you're somebody who is actually walking through a difficult situation, still living in chaos and trying to make it work, you just can't throw a big, massive book on that and say, here you go, read this, because I know I was not in any bandwidth to take anything on like that. So I wanted it to be very simple. In the process of being simple, that means that the lessons that I share actually work for a lot of different scenarios, not just my story.
Right.
Right. I always say, when the path blows up and the path does not go according to plan, what do you do next? Because that is actually called life. Like, can we just say for a second that really difficult things happen to good people every single day?
Absolutely.
You don't have to be a person who has done something bad in order to have something challenging happen. Hard things happen to good people every single day. It's how do we navigate through that and not make that mean something about ourselves, and which is still something I'm always working on. When you said that earlier, Karen, I think it's really important to just touch on that, is that the judgment piece, and one of the number one questions I get all the time is like, how do you handle the judgment of others? And if I can share a quick thing with your listeners,
Sure.
is, what is the worst thing you have said to yourself recently? Worst thought you've had, with worst words you said. And then they'll tell me, and I'll say, and who else speaks to you that way? And almost always the answer is, oh, nobody. I wouldn't let anybody else talk to me that way. And I'm like, so what does it matter what someone else is saying when the biggest critic you have is right there in your own head? You're your biggest critic at all time. So stop saying that the belief or fear or excuse of what someone else is going to say is stopping you from living the life that you're here to live, when actually your biggest critic is right there in the mirror.
It's interesting because before I became full-time podcasting and coaching, I worked for a college, and basically I was coaching students.
Mhm.
And my management loved what I did, but hated what I did, because I would tell prospective students a lot of times, I think you need to leave my office, go home, think about things. You came in saying that you wanted to go into nursing because you love helping people,
Mhm.
but you don't like the sight of blood. You don't want to work long hours, and you don't like touching people. Okay, 3 reasons why you
Yeah.
probably aren't going to do well at it. But instead of me telling them, I said, I want you to go home and think of other things that you could do to help people. And I
Mhm.
said, and I want you to leave with this. That's what I do every day. I
Mhm.
help people. And the more I said it, the more I realized I'm coaching. And I got called into my manager's office one day, and he said, you're not signing up enough students. And I said, I could sign up everybody who walks into my office, but they may not pass the nursing test. So what good is that?
Mhm.
They may pass the nursing test and start nursing, and they're not going to get through the first blood draw. I
Mhm.
said, why not give them the option to relook at things? And as I was telling that to my students, I started relooking at things. And I finally realized I love what I do, but I hate the culture I'm in. I cannot stay here anymore. And where was that coming out? My migraines were worse. My stomach hurt every day. And I was on the verge of tears all the time.
Mhm.
So I came home and I said to my special guy, guess what? I got to quit my job. And he looked at me and he goes, why? And when I told him, he said, we'll manage. I don't know how. We'll
Mhm.
manage. He said, but I'd rather have you healthy than you sick, or worse than sick, not with me at all. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting him to say, okay, but go get another job right away. That's what I want people to think about. What is it doing to you? Because we don't know how long we have on this earth. And I was tired of coming home and being angry every day.
Mhm.
So if you could wrap this up, tell me one or two words of wisdom that you'd want to give our listeners.
Well, I relate and resonate to everything that you're saying. I actually did teach in a college for 4 years and realized that I was not meant for that environment at all. I know I wasn't. I loved the students. I loved the students. I made so many incredible connections, but the culture was not for me. That's for sure. So to wrap it up, I think the biggest thing I want to say is that you can change your story at any time, regardless of what you're walking through. I know that might sound like that is insensitive. It's not meant that way. It's meant to tell you that you can change your circumstances and story at any time. I have a podcast that's just approaching 700 episodes. I have interviewed so many people who have come through unbelievable circumstances. And I'm telling you, you can change your story at any time. It requires work and it requires, consistency. But when you do it and you see a purpose that's bigger than you and outside of you, it really does become an incredible thing. And oftentimes, when it comes time to changing our story, we take a look at the people who are in our life today and think, oh my gosh, but I don't have the support and I don't have the people who would cheer me on. And that's great what they're talking about, but I don't have those people in my life. I often say that what if, you sharing your story is not about the people that are in your life today. You learning how to share or move past your story is about who you will connect with in the process. Because the people that are in my life today, most of them weren't here 8 years ago. And I couldn't imagine my life without them. I couldn't imagine my life at all without them. So don't make decisions based on who's in your life today, because that's probably not who your story's for. And if you feel called to do something good with a difficult circumstance and difficult situation, then that's a calling. And that's a purpose driven life. You get to do something worth meaning. And that is something I'll be forever grateful for, to do something good with the most difficult thing I've walked through. I don't really think I can ever put that into words that can give it justice. So don't make your decisions based on where you are today. And please know that you can change your story at any time.
Well, I have to thank you. This was absolutely wonderful today on a gray, almost rainy day here in Cleveland. You brought some sunshine into our lives, and that's what we have to look for. And somebody once said to me, even on a gray day like today, the sun is shining. It's just on the other side of the clouds. And so if it starts to get to me, I just envision where it is and I see the sun, and the rest of the day is beautiful. Thank you, Marsha. I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye now.
Bye.